I'd like to welcome Annette for the evening.
Thank you. You did a great job. Thank you. Just going to put my glass down. Welcome. So before I begin, she mentioned my name. My name is Annette Aberdale-Kendra. I'm a registered nurse. The BSN is just Bachelor's of Science in Nursing. It's just what they have us do, when you graduate from college. And basically, I'm just grateful that all of you are here this evening. I'd like to welcome you. You all doing okay this evening? Great, great. Thank you for being here. My intention this evening is to offer you all a little bit of education about eating disorders, kind of get a discussion going around the issue, hopefully decrease some of the stigmas that are out there, some of the misconceptions. And my intention is that I hope you leave this evening with hope and more knowledge about eating disorders. And if you are someone who is struggling, more avenues of support that you might be able to look to. I'm not used to this clicker, so just bear with me. I'll get going in a few minutes. So I'd like to offer an expression of gratitude. I'd like to say thank you to BayPath for having me here this evening. And Brianna, thank you for getting this whole evening together. And most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you. It means a lot that people come out for events like this about eating disorders. People's lives are busy, I get that. But it is an issue in our society, and we really need to start addressing it. I can't say enough how important dialogue is on this issue, because there's so many girls that have so much isolation and shame that are going through eating disorders. As a society, we need to start working together and talking about this issue. My intention for this evening and all of my work over the years has been one of hope. Hope for those that are struggling with eating disorders and body image issues and those that care about them. I also hope this evening, as I mentioned earlier, that I give you some education around these issues and open your eyes to what it's like for these young women that are going through eating disorders, and also the importance of group therapy and how beneficial I feel that is in the whole kind of therapeutic process of recovery for these young women. So the way I'd like this evening to go is I'll begin by talking about my experience with groups, co-facilitating. They were called psychoeducational eating disorder support groups. The psychoeducational is just a big word, meaning that there was clinical base to it and we were educating the girls. And of course it was supporting the girls throughout their recovery. Then I'll offer a brief explanation of eating disorders. I will talk a little bit about the book and why I wrote the book the way I did. It's written a little different than most eating disorder books. I will do a book reading. My hope in doing the book reading is that it kind of brings together everything that I talked to you about this evening. I think that it'll kind of make everything make a little bit more sense and put some voices to what I'm talking about. And then, of course, question and answers, and there'll be an opportunity to buy the book and have it signed, as Ms. Sittler said. I'm going to begin by talking about my philosophy of groups. Now, as a clinical individual, meaning as a nurse, it has been my experience over the years that groups for people that have a like issue are so extremely powerful. I've seen it in cancer support groups, you see it in bereavement groups, you see it in even Alcoholics Anonymous. There's something to be said when a group of people come together that are dealing with similar issues. There's a lot of strength, a lot of growth, a lot of hope, and a lot of encouragement that occurs. To take it a step farther, I'm a big advocate for women coming together in groups. When this occurs, just the female energy that happens, it's just an enormous explosion of wonderful nurturing. There's a wonderful kind of connection that occurs between women when they get together in groups. And if any of you have studied women's studies over the years or taken a women's history course, I think you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Wonderful things happen when women come together. And this is the same thing, even though they're adolescent to young women in these groups struggling through an eating disorder, you would be amazed with the growth and the amazing things that I have learned from these girls within the groups. So a nice definition of a group that I like to state is it's a safe forum to be heard, receive support, and understanding. This is a basic definition that I like to give people about a group, but I'm going to take this a step farther too. The age group of the girls in the groups that I facilitated were 16 to 22. So at this time period, peers are very important to young women of this age. And that is just a developmental standard, basically, as they're evolving into becoming young women. And so what makes eating disorder support groups that much more beneficial is it's not just a group of people around them, but it's a group of their peers. Peers that understand what it's like to wake up in the morning and say, oh, gosh, I ate too much yesterday. You know, and these girls in the group really understand what that's like. They understand what it's like to obsess about every ounce of food that they put in their body or whether they exercised enough. So this is very powerful in recovery for girls at this age. Now, the eating disorder groups that I facilitated, they were 8 weeks ongoing. So basically what it looked like is we would meet for 8 weeks, take a week off, and continue on. And I found it interesting because in the beginning we had girls that wanted to keep coming back. So they would come back and do another 8 weeks. And for a while there, we weren't changing up the format very much. People were like, how is this possible? But I found it to be very effective because recovery is not a linear process, meaning you just don't go like this and you're recovered. It's up and down, back and forth. There's different stages and phases of recovery that an individual goes through. And coming back to the group, maybe they had a relapse and they're coming back to the group, they're reworking what they've already worked on, but they're in a different place emotionally. So we're planting little seeds of hope in them every time that they're coming back, reworking the same issues that we may have talked about before, but they're in a different place. The groups, it was very important for me to keep them recovery-based and hopeful, making the focus behind the behavior. This is something I believed in a long time through all my education about eating disorders and learning. I feel it's very important to look at what's behind the behaviors. A lot of the other group approach, meaning the other professionals that these individuals have on their team, be it a social worker or a psychologist, oftentimes these individuals are looking at the behaviors themselves because this is what we need to work on. They work on the behaviors and then they're also working a little bit on what's behind the behaviors. But what's really interesting in a group setting is exploring the behaviors, what's behind them with peers. It's a safe place for these girls to kind of play and say, who was this girl before this eating disorder? Who is she behind this eating disorder, and who does she want to become after she lets this eating disorder go? So this was a very important piece in our groups, and I think that the girls really attached to this because it's a tough age to get girls to come to groups, and the girls did want to come. And I think that this piece was a safe place for them to kind of explore beyond their eating disorder. Now, I just mentioned briefly about the whole team approach. It was very important and actually kind of crucial for the girls in our group that they had a whole team. What I mean is that they would have a physician monitoring their physical health. This was a requirement. They also were required to have either a social worker or a psychologist for individual verbal therapy because, again, this is another way to work what's behind the behaviors and on the behaviors themselves. There would often be a psychiatrist if medication was warranted, a nutritionist, not all the time, but it's a good idea and would be suggested because it would help these girls to kind of mend their feud with food that they have and kind of create a new relationship. And then, of course, the last piece of the whole team would be a group. So now I want to talk a little bit about eating disorders. This is actually an image that one of the girls drew from one of the groups. And she didn't want her name to be used, so she gave me permission to just kind of use it as it is. But before I do, I just want to mention that eating disorders are addictive in nature. And with that being said, they're hard to recover from, very hard. Because unlike other addictive disorders, the individual can't avoid their drug, which is food, either lack of food or too much food. We're human beings, we need food to sustain ourselves. So unlike an alcoholic who can avoid a bar or avoid people that might trigger them to want to be around or be drinking, you can't do that with an eating disorder. And this is what makes it so extremely difficult. The other factors is that there's posters in the back when you came in or when you leave you can look at. They're just little clippings that I've used with high school students talking about media. I do a lot of media literacy. I feel like that's really important as a dialogue in our community about this issue. And those are, I just put them there because they're just some of the images that are bombarded, these girls are bombarded by on a daily basis, you know, through all types of media now. And I think that it's important to recognize that. I also put a few items here. There's a scale, in case you can't see, a chocolate bar, an apple, a mirror, nutritional facts, and a McDonald's bag. And I want you all to just kind of look at this and notice that to us, they're the items that I just said. But when somebody's going through an eating disorder, these items take on a whole new meaning. And it's very, very challenging for these young women. So I put these items out because as I talk, my hope is that kind of helps make everything come together for all of you to really kind of understand what it's like for these young women. So eating and not eating offers control over an individual and their lives that often may feel out of control. But I'm going to immediately say this is a false sense of control. I like to open up when I talk about eating disorders with this statement because for many years there was the understanding or stigma in our society, however you want to say it, that these are controlling girls. They're trying to control situations and people, and they're not controlling human beings. Something feels off in their life and they don't know just how to handle it. It's too much for them. It could be a divorce, it could be a trauma, it could be a death. Something has happened that their life just does not feel okay to them. So they're searching for some ounce of control to give them stability. And I always have to mention this. One of the girls always said in my group, she always gets this message in her mind that society gives us, let me see if I can say it right. Oh, better body, better life. And when I look at the images in media, I kind of get that. You know, if you listen to a TV or you listen to a radio, you'll hear very often about dieting, and you kind of get the subliminal message that, yeah, if my body was better, sure. I'd probably do better in school, I'd be a better athlete, my boyfriend would love me more, whatever it may be. These messages get into these young girls' heads, and so of course their life is feeling off for some reason. So they try a better body, and they hope that it's going to work. And in the beginning, like I said, it offers them a sense of control. But this is a false sense of control, in that once it gets going, their lives become even more out of control than they were before. Now, many of these young women, they may feel an overwhelming sensitivity. They have an overwhelming feelings. They have worthlessness. They deal with anxiety and the idea of perfection and perfectionism. Therefore, they want to insulate themselves from the rest of the world. For these young women, it's so much easier for them to just internalize everything and just get angry at themselves. They don't want to hurt anybody. They don't want to make anybody angry. They don't want to offend anyone, so they'll just turn it inward. It's safer. It's more comforting to them because the world already feels so unsafe around them. And I like to talk about this because eating disorders, you know, I like to give the example of a fire. There has to be the right elements for a fire to kind of erupt and stay going. It's kind of the same thing with an eating disorder. There are certain risk factors that an individual will have within their personality or their lives that do put them at risk. A few of the biological factors are if they have an addictive disorder in their family, a history of eating disorders in their family, that's a risk factor. Psychological factors, if they have an underlying anxiety disorder, underlying depression, these are risk factors. And then, of course, there's environmental factors. Any type of trauma, like I said before, a divorce, a death, just peer pressure and societal pressures, those are all risk factors. So if you get an individual with some of these issues and some of these risk factors, something will happen in their lives that will spark and ignite the eating disorder. And that's usually what happens for these girls. They're not even aware of what's going on. It's not a conscious choice. And what happens is then that eating disorder, before they know it, is out of control and controlling them. So I'm going to start talking about anorexia, and this is the restricting disorder. So basically, somebody with anorexia, they spend a lot of their day tallying calories, exercising, they severely restrict their intake, and they have a phobic avoidance of specific foods. Often, they have time thinking about food is not time thinking about their emotional pain. They soon realize that it's easier to think about food and calories and numbers and weight all the time than to deal with their emotions. They don't have the tools to look at those overwhelming feelings that were in the previous slide or the anxiety that they're feeling. They don't know how to manage that. So it's so much easier just to focus on the whole food body component. Now, when the addiction kicks in, these girls actually experience a high, and that high offers a sense of power and success in decreasing calories and body weight. Girls do describe it as an actual high they get this feeling of just being on top of the world. And if somebody's dealing with a depression or somebody's dealing with life that feels completely overwhelming to them, I think we can all understand why this would be a little bit comforting to them. Bulimia nervosa is uncontrolled episodic binge eating followed by purging through self-induced vomiting and/or excessive exercise. Often these individuals have periods of restricting food intake also. That's a piece I like to talk about because a lot of people don't realize that about bulimia. These girls can go back and forth between restricting and binging. So this is why bulimia becomes very dangerous physically for a lot of these young women. A lot of physical stress on their bodies. They experience excessive dissatisfaction and preoccupation with weight and body. There's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame with bulimia along with the other eating disorders. The bulimic cycle is very, very difficult for individuals to break out of. Often, say they had a fight with their boyfriend that day. They go home after school and they binge to numb themselves and just take away everything and forget about it. Then they immediately feel guilty and shameful that they just binged. So then they will go and purge. That builds more guilt and more shame. It's a cycle and a really unhealthy cycle that really eats away at them emotionally and physically. Binge eating disorder. Binge eating disorder is kind of characterized as binging and overeating. The individual does feel a temporary sense of comfort and numbing when they do binge. Now, I have to put this in here. The nurse in me likes to always give a scientific type of explanation about things. Certain foods create certain effects, and I have to put this in here for binge eating disorder because people are like, well, why can't they just stop? Like, they don't get it. Well, just stop eating all these foods. This is why. Carbohydrates have a chemical change in your body. When you have carbohydrates, they boost your serotonin levels. So this will decrease the feelings of depression, but temporarily is the key word there. So if somebody is dealing with depression, they're going to want to feel that depression going away more and more. So if it's a temporary feeling, they're going to reach for more carbohydrates. And this is what causes the binge to keep occurring. Sweet and salty foods increase your levels of endorphins, which are your body's natural painkillers. So if somebody's life is feeling terribly painful emotionally, this is going to give a calming feeling. This is going to give a kind of good feeling to them. So again, they're going to want to keep doing it because it's going to make them feel temporarily better. Atypical eating disorder, I'm so glad that now this is actually something that in the medical community they are more aware of and they are talking about more. This is any medical or psychiatric condition that primarily interferes with eating or causes weight loss, and which so preoccupies individuals in a way that negatively harms their daily living experiences. Now, I'm trying to think how I want to say this. I believe there's a lot of people in our society that fit almost into this category. Will they evolve into a full-blown eating disorder? Maybe not. But I think there's a lot of females in our society that are consumed by thoughts of what they're eating. They're consumed by how much they weigh, what size clothing they wear, how they look. And I think that it's important that we are here this evening. The evenings like this, groups like this that come together to talk about it, we have to start getting the message out there, starting with our younger females of our society, about body acceptance, size acceptance, about health. Health is not just one body type. There are many different body types that are very healthy. We need to fight some of the stigmas that society and a lot of those big businesses are selling us because we're being brainwashed. And we're being brainwashed to the point where we're developing eating disorders that are considered atypical. So you might not be binging and purging per se and fitting the complete clinical criteria of a bulimic or an anorexic, but your life is being altered, and we have one life. We have one time on this earth, so we have to start coming together as a society and fighting these messages. I like to talk about statistics because I think it's very real. I think I can come up here and talk to you, but I think the statistics are not, without the statistics, I'm just saying words. I think these kind of give you the raw and harsh reality of eating disorders. 43% of those with an eating disorder report the onset between the ages of 16 and 20. That is the age group that were in the groups that I co-facilitated. 95% of those with an eating disorder are between the ages of 12 and 25. This statistic speaks to what I just spoke about. To me, this speaks about our society. The ages of 12 to 25 is when a young woman is going through a lot of emotional changes. She's growing. She's finding who her personality is, what her individual traits are going to be. There's a lot of emotional growth that happens. I feel as a society we're failing young women. We're sending them the wrong messages and not building them up enough. The mortality rate associated with anorexia is 12 times higher than the death rate associated with all other causes of death for females ages 15 to 24 years old. That's pretty disturbing in my mind. Over half of teenage girls and 1/3 of teenage boys use unhealthy weight control behaviors, skipping meals, fasting, cigarettes, vomiting, or taking laxatives. I like to put this one in here. I don't have experience with working with young men or boys that have been dealing with eating disorders. There are similarities, but they are handled very differently. But I cannot do a talk on eating disorders and not mention the fact that males are being very affected by eating disorders in our society. There's a lot of stigmas around it for females, but there's even more around for males. So I'd like to make people aware of that. So that's another thing to be thinking about. Up to 24 million people of all ages and genders suffer from an eating disorder in this country, be it anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating disorder. So that's 24 million. There's approximately 316 million or maybe a little bit more in this country. So there's a lot of people when you think about it from that standpoint. I like to put this in there because we have a lot of athletes, and this kind of goes back, the last one goes back to the idea that, in order to have a fire start, you have to have the right elements. They have done comparisons of the psychological profiles of athletes and those with anorexia, and they found these factors to be the same. Perfectionism, high self-expectation, competitiveness, hyperactivity, repetitive exercise, compulsiveness, drive, tendency towards depression, body image distortions, and preoccupation with dieting and weight. Now, some athletes will have these personality traits, but they may not evolve or develop an eating disorder. And that's just because of what I mentioned before. All the elements need to be there for an eating disorder to happen for individuals. You all doing okay? Okay. So, core struggles, this is my own term, this is not a clinical term, but this is a term that I use over the years, and it didn't take long with working with these young women. I found that there were these, what I call core struggles, but they're commonalities amongst the spectrum of girls that I have worked with. And repeatedly, despite the disorder that they might be dealing with, despite their family background, despite any of the life circumstances, these are the top issues that I liked working on with these girls, to really focus on what was behind the behaviors. So when it comes to feelings, these girls feel a lot. Things are overwhelming, their feelings are very overwhelming to them, and they don't know how to manage them. The voice of the eating disorder, this is again my term, not technical term. It's not a voice. These girls don't hear voices in their heads, but if you all slow down and think about it, we all have a negative voice in our head. We have a negative and a positive voice. When somebody develops an eating disorder, that negative voice is so overpowering and smothering of that positive voice that I like to call it the voice of the eating disorder, because the longer the individual has an eating disorder, the stronger, more powerful they hear that negative banter in their head. And this is another piece that makes recovery so difficult. Perfectionism. These girls are just trying to be the best they can be. Sometimes the perfectionism comes from an underlying anxiety, but they just feel that they have to be perfect, the perfect daughter, perfect student, perfect athlete, perfect girlfriend, friend, perfect student, everything. And this is a driving force for the eating disorder. Fear. These girls struggle with fear. There is a normal amount of fear developmentally that goes on during this age group that I spoke of earlier. But these girls, again, they don't have the tools, they don't know how to manage this fear. It's fear of the unknown, fear of maybe what happened, fear of just growing. A lot of these girls have a fear of growing up and what that means for them. And a lot of these girls don't even know what they're afraid of. Control. I spoke of control when I started talking this evening, and again, they're just trying to control a life that feels out of control to them, and they don't have the healthy tools to manage and regain control in a more healthy, balanced way. One woman's recovery, I have the two asterisks there because this is not a core struggle. This is not something that's, behind the behaviors, but it's so important, and I loved doing this piece in groups. One woman's recovery is when we would invite a guest speaker to come to the group and share their recovery experience with the girls. And again, the girls are surrounded by their peers who understand what they're going through. And this was an extremely powerful week when we would have a speaker come in, because the girls would learn to step outside their own box that felt secure to them and actually think about recovery a little bit, but through the eyes of somebody else's experience. And this again was planting the seeds to kind of help nudge them in the direction of recovery when they felt it was something that they could start enduring. And in the book, it's funny because there was a few girls in the group that were just hell-bent against having a speaker. They just thought, no way, I don't want to hear about this. It's going to trigger me. They were very anxious about it. And I reflect that in the book because it happened more than once. And there's a character in the book who felt the same way, and she actually gained wonderful insight because of the way the whole experience was handled. Hungers. These are not physical hungers I speak of. These are emotional hungers. These girls are searching for in acceptance. They have hungers for people to hear them, people to acknowledge them, people to understand them. So teaching these young women that they have needs and that their needs are important and they do deserve to be validated was a very important part of the group. Culture and values. This is what I was talking about with our society. We have an extremely influential society when it comes to body image, eating disorders, health. I feel that we're bombarded constantly by these messages. And I always found it so interesting, the week that we would work on culture and values, because you would see these girls that maybe didn't have much to say in the previous groups, but when we talked about our society and the messages, and we allowed these girls to have a voice, it would just be amazing. These girls would light up, and they would just embrace the fact that they had so much to say. And again, they taught me so much. Moving forward is not a core struggle also, but it is a piece that I feel is important. Life is ever-changing, the different phases and stages. Nothing is consistent in our life. And I felt that this was really important for the young girls to work on, because in my mind, recovery is not just about recovery from an eating disorder. My goal in helping these girls through the group setting was to give them tools that would carry them beyond recovery, through all the stages of being a woman and all the ups and downs that come with womanhood and being a female. Looking at what is behind these disorders truly supports the recovery-based approach. It allows the individuals to learn more about how to manage and pay attention to these core struggles, and it offers the girls a healthier way to approach and care for themselves. And again, beyond recovery also. I'm not just talking about during recovery. The eating disorder happened for a reason, and if these girls can develop new ways of dealing with their feelings, getting their needs acknowledged, and working on their body image and their physical health, they can come out of this even stronger, more adaptable, and just, look back and say, well, the eating disorder was just one of the hurdles I had to get over in this life. This is my hope for a lot of the young women that are out there. So is everybody still doing okay? Does anybody need to get up and stretch before I continue? I don't want to keep rambling on if anybody needs to get up and move around. Y'all good? Okay, we'll keep going. So Group Voices Within the Journey of Eating Disorder Recovery is the name of the book I wrote. And the goal of this work is to resemble a true eating disorder support group based on the groups that I co-facilitated. One of the reasons why in this area there is a big lack of groups. This has always been a problem. And I don't need to go back into and explain why I think groups are so important. But I kind of got the idea from a few of the girls in the group who kind of wanted to bottle the experience and have it be forever there, that they could go back to time and time again if there wasn't a group to go to. So this was the goal of my work. So how was I going to do this? I didn't know. I'm a nurse. I'm not a writer. So this was an interesting feat for me. It was suggested to do a dialogue format. I never would have thought of writing a book in a dialogue format, but it works. And it works because it invites the reader as the sixth member of the group. I've gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of individuals who have read the book, and they feel because of the dialogue, they find themselves almost answering the girls. They almost become part of the conversation that's going on. So to me, that's very effective in bottling a group in a book. It reads as a story. This is important because there's nothing worse than a young individual, or anybody for that matter, trying to work on themselves emotionally. They pick up a self-help book. They're making lists and like, okay, I got to do this now. Okay, I'm supposed to be thinking like this and putting up Post-its here and there. If you are going through something emotionally or you are in a crisis, it's not going to benefit you. It's overwhelming. You already have so much going on in your mind. Trying to read and decipher through a self-help book is excruciating for these individuals. So the book reads as a story, and in doing that, what happens is somebody could pick up the book who has no part of recovery from an eating disorder, but they can pick it up and read it. And through the characters and the dialogue, little seeds of hope are being planted about recovery in their minds, and without them putting any effort in, from them just reading. It's also beneficial to read as a story because somebody can read the book from beginning to end, and then, say 6 weeks down the road, they just cannot connect with their needs. They're avoiding them and they don't know why. They could go to the chapter on hungers and read about needs and be reacquainted with it and hopefully work through it with the help of the book and their individual therapist. I think it's important with a book like this that an individual works through it also with an individual therapist. It can be something that if there's not a group in the area, the therapist can actually work on with the individual as a group together and kind of decipher and work through it as if it is a group with just the two of them, but they're working through it side by side. And then it was mentioned to me that it would make an amazing screenplay and video, and I never thought of that. And it would. It really would be really neat to see the book come alive because there isn't a lot of plays out there that actually show what it's like to go through an eating disorder. There's been movies, but it would be interesting to see real life people on a stage sometime, to be able to see their facial expressions through the different group interactions, to see what they're doing, with their body mannerisms. Are they hunched over? Are they looking the other way? Are they, feeling their thighs? Whatever they're doing, it would be really interesting to see it played out, and I think very powerful. But this is not something I've gone on to endeavor as of yet, but it was suggested that I mention this. So, qualities of the book. Non-triggering. For those of you that don't know what triggering means, triggering is a term that's used for addiction and addictive-like disorders. Triggering it could be a person, it could be a situation, it could be a place, an event that basically reinforces the behaviors that somebody is trying to let go of. So this was not hard at all for me with the non-triggering because the groups were recovery-based and we did not allow triggering talk to occur. Meaning there was no talk about sizes, there was no talk about meal plans, there was no talk about calories or weights. These were off-limit issues, and those statements were very clearly made before each group session started. And all too often, young women have told me throughout the years that they would be suggested to read an eating disorder book by their parent or their guidance counselor, and they would read that book and they would be triggered and they would get really discouraged. And I am not saying by any means that those works are not helpful. Triggering can be different in different avenues for different people. So I worked very hard to make sure, the best to my ability, that for my knowledge, the book is non-triggering. The interesting piece came when it came time to publish the book. Our society, again, I have to tell you. I had a publishing company that promised me the world, but they wanted me to graphically describe a purge. Why on earth am I going to graphically describe a purge? There's no benefit in that. These individuals live this every day. I want my book to be hopeful. I want it to be a sense of strength. They don't need this, but in the publisher's mind, this was necessary to sell the book. So I shopped around until I found somebody that held my values that were true to me. And I think that's really sad. They don't know about eating disorders. I'm the considered expert to them about eating disorders, and they're telling me what needs to be in there. It still burns me a little bit. The spiritual component is intricately woven throughout. Now, this is a piece that's a little bit different from most eating disorder works. The spiritual piece is something I saw that was missing in a lot of girls' recovery process. And I'm not talking just about religion. For some, it was religion. But, there's all these different philosophies out there. There's this authentic self that people talk about, the Buddha nature people talk about. I like to describe the spiritual component to people as just, we all have this more quiet, peaceful place that when we get rid of everything, all the stimulation around us, and just sit, it's there. It's that kinder part of us, that just soft part of us, where our mind doesn't control it. But it's very important that this is part of recovery. If you look at AA, they do have a spiritual component in, their 12 steps. And this is something, as I mentioned, a lot of girls were missing. And I think a lot of the girls at this age really, they grabbed onto this piece. They enjoyed doing these activities very much that revolved around a spiritual component. One of them is a body healing meditation. I did put this in the book. It was suggested to the girls, we would do it within the group. It was suggested that they go home and they have somebody record it, or they record it themselves, or they can read it to themselves. Basically, it's a wonderful meditation that goes through your entire body, thanking your body and asking your body for forgiveness for the way you may have mistreated that part of your body. There's well-wishing. This is a Tibetan Buddhist type of kind of belief that putting out good to the world scatters good throughout. And well-wishing is something I would end the weeks of the group with the girls. And it was very important to me to send them off with something positive every week. And that is something that's also included in the book, because I feel it's so important for them to have some ounce of strength and hope to carry with them through the difficulties they may be facing. And mindfulness. It's interesting to me because people talk about mindfulness nowadays like it's this new age thing. It's been around for thousands of years. And the proof is in, look at a 2-year-old. They're the most mindful little beings you could ever imagine. And they're good at being mindful. That's why they test us so much. Mindfulness comes into really an important place in eating disorder recovery because the concept of mindful eating is there, really helping heal the relationship with food that these individuals have. And also the idea of just those overwhelming feelings. Mindfulness helps with that too, just kind of sitting and watching and just observing instead of getting consumed by all of them. The characters of the book are composites of many young women, so each character is not based on one individual person. And I did this purposely. I wanted the reader to be able to relate with many of the characters throughout the book, because the girls go through different type of issues throughout the book, and I didn't want the reader to just get attached to one. And it's not specified which eating disorder each character has, but you can pretty much figure it out. But I didn't feel it was something that needed to be stated because, again, our minds make us attached to things. And I didn't want somebody dealing with anorexia to feel, well, I'm relating with her, but she's got bulimia. That doesn't make sense. Because in a real group setting, somebody with anorexia will learn an immense amount and get a month's support from somebody with bulimia. Because, again, we're looking at what's behind the behaviors. That's the same, even if the behaviors are different. So I'm just going to introduce you briefly to the characters. Anika is 22. She is going to Holyoke Community College and studying business administration, and Anika has a lot of issues in her family with boundaries. Taylor is 17, and she is in high school, and she has a lot of dysfunction in her family and a lot of abuse going on. Carly is basically your all-American girl. She's at Northfield Mount Hermon. And Min is from Seoul, Korea. She's a freshman at Suffield Academy. So she's dealing with a lot of cultural changes and a lot of personal struggles in that way for herself, along with just missing her family at a time when she really needs them around her. Stephanie is she's a junior at UMass, and she has a lot of health issues in her family, and she's dealing with a lot of grief in her life at the time that the book is evolving. I did make the book multicultural because we've had girls from various countries, various backgrounds, and I think that that's another stigma of our society. It is not just a certain group that struggles with eating disorders and body image issues. Jillian is the facilitator. Group is written with the intent to carry these girls beyond their recovery to a more balanced, healthy form of living that will continue through the many phases of womanhood. And this is what I mentioned earlier. I have had a few people read the book that do not struggle with eating disorders and body image issues, but one particular person was going through a divorce. She found it very helpful because these are tools that as women we can all use. You know, whether you're dealing with an eating disorder, whether you just have an anxiety disorder, you struggle with depression on and off, the tools that are in the book are just to balance and keep you healthy and in touch with what you need and how to manage your emotional thoughts and your thinking thoughts and all that goes into your everyday life. So again, I started on the idea of hope, and I'd like to end. I believe that those who struggle with an eating disorder or body image issues are capable of learning more about themselves, finding acceptance and evolving into a more balanced way of living and relating in this world. I firmly believe that. It is not easy, and it is excruciating for these girls a lot of the time. And on this note of hope, I want you all to know that I brought a couple of papers in the back. There's one that's a resource guide that has wonderful websites. There's addresses, phone numbers for different various resources for eating disorders and eating disorder recovery. There's also a paper there that I love. It's 20 Ways to Love Your Body. To me, this is like starting to get that ball rolling in our society. Really read that if you pick that up, and really try to reinforce. Just pick 2 a week and just make sure that you're constantly doing those. Work on accepting your body and respecting your body. I have another one there. It's called Way something. What is it called? Way Out? No Way. That's what it is. And it's put out by NEDA, which is the National Eating Disorder Association. And I love it. It's a contract that an individual can make with themselves to promise themselves to respect their body on all levels. And again, this is another step in the right direction of our society to really start embracing our bodies as females and respecting ourselves on all levels. And there's also a few papers out there it's called Lisa's Light of Hope, and it's an organization started by a family who unfortunately have lost their daughter to the complications of eating disorders, but they are doing an amazing job doing so many community-based projects to build awareness, help with treatment, and build education around eating disorders. They're actually affiliated with Bay State, and they have a walk coming up in November, and there's paperwork on that back there if you would be interested. Before I get to questions and answers, I like to do my well-wishing, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a well-wishing of hope for everyone that's here this evening. May the voices beyond recovery carry you as you embark and continue on your own personal journey. I wish all of you strength, understanding, and empowerment. Be well, and thank you. Thank you for coming out this evening. Thank you. So, it's question and answer time. People can raise their hand and I can answer questions. There are, I don't know if there's any, people got pieces of paper if people are not comfortable with just raising their hand and talking. Sometimes it's a difficult issue for people to want to ask questions about. Yes? I'm sorry, can a fear, what?
Okay. Can a fear of diseases trigger an eating disorder?
Can a fear of diseases?
Yeah, so like, let's say like in a family, like cancer or stuff like serious diseases, can that trigger like something like that?
I think it can be a contributing factor. I think that when somebody has a fear of diseases in their family, they might have an underlying level of anxiety that they deal with. And if that anxiety isn't managed correctly and they have the right personality for the eating disorder to develop, of course, it could be a definite risk factor. Does it mean that they will develop an eating disorder? No, not necessarily. Anybody else want to raise their hand and ask?
I have a question then.
Yes.
Do you find that there's, I mean, obviously, if the girls are in a group setting, they've been identified as having an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So do you find that the parents are more noticing of anorexia or bulimia? Is there any difference? Do parents deny something going on? And how is the most common way that girls get help?
I think that, see, it's hard to say which is more apparent to parents. I think that as parents, there is some denial at first. Oftentimes, a girl may just be becoming more health conscious in their parents' eyes. They might be losing a little bit of weight. They might be trying to, get a little stronger. This is what a parent may think. I do think that now that we have a dialogue going here, and I hope that this carries on to other places, I do think that as parents or friends or, teachers, coaches especially too, I think that these individuals start seeing a change in personality, start seeing a little bit of isolation, big change in the way that these individuals eat and exercise, I think that this is noticeable. With bulimia or a binge eating disorder, often, you won't necessarily see the binge. They will do that in private, and they get very good at purging, so you won't necessarily hear the vomiting. So, it's one of those things where just awareness and where the education comes in on a societal level to understand what the early signs are. And I'm such an advocate for that, because the earlier an eating disorder is acknowledged, even if it's not a full-fledged eating disorder, the better it is for that individual. Because once that eating disorder really gets into motion and gets hooked in, it is excruciating to work through. There was another question over here. Yes. Got to use the microphone.
I'm loud enough without it, trust me. Do you think that there's any easy way of recovery beyond group therapy for an individual who's suffering with it, who doesn't really have the access to the group therapy?
I don't think that recovery is based on group therapy. I think that it is just an extra source of support and resource. It depends on the team that the individual has. A lot of the girls I've worked with, it's very hard. Say the first thing that happens is their parents realize something's wrong. So what are they going to do? They're going to bring them to a medical doctor. And the medical doctor is going to say, okay, we have to rule out why this person's losing weight. So of course, you think of things like cancer, Crohn's disease, other issues like that. There's nothing physically wrong. So then they start thinking, okay, it could be an eating disorder. So then, of course, it's suggested to get a social worker or somebody else for some individual verbal therapy. But you have to have the right connection. So I've had some girls that have gone through 5 counselors, and they can't connect with these people for whatever reason. So you need to find the right team approach that works for you. These are my suggestions in a perfect world, not using the word perfect, but in an ideal type of recovery. I would like to see all these pieces. If somebody goes to an inpatient type of setting for recovery, a lot of times these young women have to go to an inpatient community. Either they're not physically stable enough, they may be dealing with suicide attempts, so they will go into different hospitalized settings. And in those settings, they will have individual therapy, they will have nutritional counseling, occupational therapy, usually group therapy. And all these pieces, what they do, if you can envision, I like to envision the girls almost with like a backpack on their back. And every piece that they get, whether it sticks at that moment, it's filling their backpack up with positive, hopeful, encouraging moments that will stick. And hopefully they get to a place where those are all going to kind of gel together and recovery will be possible.
And then just as a follow-up, I have a friend do you think it's common, she's been going through it for about 3.5 years now, of actual trying to recover from it, not just having it. And do you find that it's common to be going through it for kind of that amount of time, or is it any less or more?
For some people, it's a lifelong struggle. I'll be honest with you. Because as I mentioned before, recovery isn't linear. There are all these different phases and stages of recovery. And I actually have a handout on that. If anybody's interested, I could give it to Brianna to copy. It's an addiction. So there's been a few different people that I've seen. There's been people that go on to recovery and they're okay. They're not tempted by food anymore. They are so sick of their eating disorder, they don't ever want to go back there. So they're good. But then you get other people that they're considered what's considered in recovery or recovered, but food is still an issue around weight sometimes. They have to be careful. They have to be on top of it. So it all depends on the actual person. Recovery is different for everyone. It looks different for everyone and appears different. So as a matter of years, no. I've known people that it took them a good 11 years before they actually even wanted to recover. So it all varies for a lot of people based on their life circumstance, the amount of support they have, and what's going on within them. Yes?
Do you think that if parents force their child, like if they see their child struggling with this thing, and if parents force them to do a recovery, to, go to a group like this or do other stuff like that, do you think that would hinder the process more than helping them because it's not the child themselves who are trying to get better?
That's a great point. Recovery is a personal choice. I don't believe it hinders. I believe, like I said, it's getting a piece and putting it in that backpack for them for when they're ready. And it's just like recovery from any other addiction. There are a million relapses, and until that person makes the choice that I'm going to do this, they won't do it. The parents can bend over backwards, they can cry, they can yell, they can scream. It's not going to make a difference. Recovery is a personal choice. Some people don't ever choose recovery. It is a personal choice.
Hi. There are these things called Pro-Ana and like Pro-Mia network media things. Do you think those are like just an attempt at getting attention, or do you think those are like really, truly people with eating disorders? Like, and their way of communicating in a community with people like them?
I think that there's an element of both. I don't know who historically started those sites, but those have been a problem for many, many years. I think that when somebody is entrenched in their eating disorder and they are in a very big, there's a stage of denial, and they're in that denial stage and everybody's going crazy, like, oh, you have an eating disorder, you need to get help. And they're just like, get away from me, I'm fine. Their disorder will fuel them, and they want to go to sites like that because they're trying to hold on to something that everybody around them is trying to take away. So those sites are just horrible, and they are used a lot by people that are struggling, because if you think about it, the eating disorder is serving a purpose for these young girls. It is an unhealthy purpose. And when people around them who love and care about them are trying to take that away from them, they're going to do everything in their power to hold on to it. And so whether it's those people that are feeling it, I don't know. I have a feeling that I don't know where they came from, but they are horrible, horrible sites.
Hi, for teenage girls who are extreme perfectionists, who are not treated in any way, do you see future emotional problems that tend to be similar in some of these people?
Absolutely. I think that with perfectionism comes a lot of anxiety, and then from anxiety comes depression. So I feel that, even if the perfectionistic mindset that they have doesn't evolve into an eating disorder, in a way it can be debilitating in itself. It can get in the way. And again, through the different phases and stages of an individual's life as a woman, there's so many natural ups and downs that occur in our lives. If they are stuck being perfectionistic, they need to find ways to work with that and kind of balance that, because that is a very heightened state, and it's a very unhealthy state for them to be in.
Thank you.
Yeah, at what point do they cross the line and become an anorexic? Is it a BMI, or is it, how are they diagnosed with it? Is it considered to be are there physiological things that happen that once those things happen, then they're definitely anorexic? Or it seems like it's a continuum where it would be hard to say, okay, now you're just a skinny person, but now you've crossed the line now and you're absolutely an anorexic. What's the deciding factor there?
There are deciding factors. It's the DSM, it's going to be 5, it's coming out in October. It's a psychological manual that gives you the actual clinical criteria for these. But I have a very personal angst with that because of the way insurance companies are now. There are so many girls that cannot get the help they need. And again, I can't mention enough, early on, before a girl might start growing lanugo on her body, which is hair because she's lost so much weight, or loss of her menses, before that point, if her eating is that altered that she's only eating, say, an apple and a bowl of cereal a day, she needs help. But getting that help is not something that will be covered by insurance at that point.
Are there physiological like some blood tests or blood, you know,
There's
or,
not blood tests, but-
liver studies
Well,
or something
all
that
of
would
those things are going to
define it.
get thrown off. So when it comes to the point that somebody will be questionable as having a disorder, then of course the manual is brought out and, you know, do they fit the criteria, yes or no, because everything is based on diagnosis for reimbursement from insurance companies. So you have to fit, they have certain criteria in there, and I'm not sure what it's going to be for the 5, but yeah, there's a certain amount of weight that has to be lost. There's a certain amount, you know, the heart rate needs to be low. Like if, say, somebody needs to go to a hospital, they cannot be admitted to an inpatient type of facility unless they meet certain criteria. So you get these girls. I know one girl, this breaks my heart. She knew that she needed to go inpatient. She could not handle recovery on her own. And she wasn't sick enough. It's absurd. So you know what she did? This is horrible. She did not eat anything but sips of water for 3 days. And finally, she got to the point where she couldn't even get out of bed, and then she was able to be admitted. So the criteria has to be by the medical doctor and usually the social worker or psychologist together to clinically, but I don't like that clinical thing because in my opinion, it needs to be dealt with even before it gets to that clinical phase.
What's the physiological sequence of events that, you know, when someone is sliding down that slope, you know, what's physiological things happen to them first when,
It's different with everybody's body. I mean, we're human beings, so our body makeup is different. You might get an individual with anorexia that, you know, maybe they start passing out and nobody knows why. They start getting dizzy spells. There might be somebody who gets an irregular heart rate. There might be somebody who the first thing that happens is they lose their period. There's no perfect process because chemically we're all different. So we're all going to respond to starvation differently. We're all going to just, you know, respond to the use of laxatives or purging differently. You know, I mean, dentists are now getting involved and being knowledgeable enough now that they look at people's teeth. And if they see erosion on young girls, they start to question and will ask the parent, you know, is there any type of vomiting going on? You know, there's all kinds of different things, but you can't put it in a box. It's different for everyone, okay?
Aside from getting a degree in counseling, like a graduate degree, what would be beneficial in order to become an eating disorder counselor?
Well, I think if you get your degree, there are amazing, what do you call them? Like educational, like seminars that you can do. You can go to resources like the National Eating Disorder Association. And if you go online, I can't think of them offhand right now, but there's wonderful resources for professionals of all kinds. You know, if you're a physician, if you're a social worker, if you're a psychologist, who wants to further, you know, and take their educational piece somewhere different along the lines of eating disorders, you know, because some people just want to focus on a binge eating disorder. Some just want to focus on males. So it depends what you want your focus. There are many resources out there, and I cannot advocate enough to find a mentor, somebody who has been working in the field, because I really believe that, and maybe we all know people that can be very book smart and know a lot, but there's nothing like somebody who's been doing it and has learned. That's where you're going to get your most experience. That's where I got my best experience. I have done a lot of seminars with my mentor to really get me up to where I needed to be when I decided to do eating disorder work, but I learned so much more from her.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So if everybody ready so that I can answer some of these? Okay. Oh. Oh, sure.
Mix them in, so.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to read the question and then I'll answer it. Are there any kind of punishments the girls have to face if they talk about their forbidden rules you had described, like talking about calories or not eating during a mealtime in rehabs? If so, what are the punishments? I'm assuming that this is during the groups when I said it was going to be non-triggering. No, of course there was no punishments. Oftentimes the girls would begin talking about things just because they're just complaining about the new meal plan they have, or they're really mad at their swim coach because they're not letting them swim because they lost 5 pounds. Whatever it may be, we just gently remind them that this is talk that can be disturbing to other people. So no. There was no punishment. It was a very gentle group, a very supportive group. A very good question. If eating disorders present in girls 12 to 25 years old, what happens to the disorder as they mature? Good question. Often it can stay with them. I've seen some people where it might dissipate a little bit, kind of go away because they might be in a more stable place in their life. They might like what's going on around them. They might have a great boyfriend, jobs might be good, but then they never really dealt with the whole issue. So all it takes is one little thing again, and it will set them all the way back. They won't be recovered, but they'll be at a plateau. That's the best way I can describe it. There are people that do plateau at different stages of their eating disorder, and they're very functional there. But again, it's not a true recovery for them. They still have that on their mind a lot. Are teen girls with anorexia who are not treated more likely as an adult to have future emotional problems, and what types? I think that teen girls that do have anorexia, again, this relates to the question I just answered. I think that any eating disorder-like behavior, and even those atypical eating disorders that I mentioned earlier, anybody that is dealing and overly focused on their food or their body or their weight, I think that if they don't get the right tools to work on those core struggles that I spoke about, managing their feelings, dealing with, really acknowledging their needs and saying it's okay that I have needs. And you know what, going up to somebody and saying, I'm pissed off at you, and feeling like they can do that. If they don't do those things, of course, more emotional problems will occur. And generally, you'll see more of a depression occur also in these young women. Can girls change or recover on their own, or is professional help mandatory? Unfortunately, girls have to make the choice to want to change. So that is their own personal choice, and that happens at random times for people. Professional help is needed, unfortunately. You can't do it alone because of that voice of the eating disorder that I mentioned. They're too consumed. It's an addictive disorder. It's the same reason why somebody with alcoholism or drug use, why they can't do it on their own. You need outside intervention. You need like a biased type of person to kind of guide you and set you on your path, to teach you about managing your emotional self and your thoughts. How long can someone have an eating disorder before recognizing and addressing it? This is different for everyone. Some people present right away. Other people, it's more subtle for many years. So again, it's another question that just doesn't fall into a certain category. It's just the people around them, and I can't advocate enough. If you people that are here, if you see a difference in somebody's personality, or you see them, isolating themselves, again, food changes, exercise changes, see them maybe becoming a little obsessive about some things, talk to them. It's okay to say, are you okay? I've noticed these things. Tell them what you're noticing. They get mad at you, it's okay. But it is important that people, if there's something you notice, that you do acknowledge it as early on as you're noticing it. What is recovery? And what is considered being recovered? This is a great question. Recovery is different for everyone. Like I mentioned, some people don't even look back and say, you know what? I'm at peace with food, I'm at peace with my body, this is all done, this is behind me. Other people know that this is a little bit going to stay with them forever, and that they need to be aware of that negative part of them, that negative voice, and stay on top of it. And when things get a little stressful, make sure that they're nurturing themselves and balancing their life enough so that it doesn't become something that becomes, I'm going to say the word enticing to them, because that's what it becomes to a lot of girls in recovery. It's a beautiful relationship that happens with this eating disorder for these girls. They really grieve the loss of the eating disorder as they're going through recovery, because it's been like an internal friend. It's been a way for them to kind of feel supported and cared about, but really in a dysfunctional way. Is it possible for someone to relapse after 10 years? I do. I think it's possible for anyone to relapse. I think that, again, like any addictive disorder, it's important to stay balanced and stay on top of yourself emotionally, stay on top of your thoughts, and make sure that you're managing your stress and anxiety and have healthy support around you. I think that a lot of people get into situations where they lose that healthy support over the years. And I can't advocate enough for that support being there. And just having somebody to call. This is why, in AA they have sponsors. It's so important in addictive disorders to have people that you can trust to go to and say, hey, I'm not feeling well and I don't know how to get out of this. Having people like that can help for relapse after that many years. And that was it for the questions. So thank you for being here. And I have to say that, if someone you care about or you yourself is struggling with an eating disorder, please reach out to the many sources that are out there. And recovery is challenging, but it is possible. And just remember, if you are somebody struggling or you know of somebody, you're not alone. There's many people. This is a big problem in our society, and you don't need to go through this alone. So thank you for being here with me.